I wonder if you have ever been made to feel like a ghost in your own home. Not a spectre that haunts and frightens, but something far quieter, far more tragic. A presence that is felt but not seen, a service that is accepted but not acknowledged. For years, I had been the silent architecture of my family's life, the foundation upon which my daughter, Clara, built her world. I was the reliable warmth of the fireplace, the ever-present light in the window, the sturdy floorboards that never creaked. I thought this was the definition of motherhood, a slow, willing act of erasure for the sake of another's brilliant visibility. I was wrong. The erasure was not an act of love, it was an act of consumption. And the lesson came not with a shout, but with the cold, metallic whisper of scissors in the dead of night. The morning it happened, the light was a pale, wintry grey, the kind that seems to leach all the colour from the world. I woke with a strange sense of chill on the back of my neck, a draught where there should have been warmth and weight. My hair, my long, silver hair, had been my quiet vanity for 50 years. It was the one piece of myself I had kept through marriage, motherhood, and widowhood. My Robert, my late husband, had loved it. He would brush it for me in the evenings, the gentle pull of the bristles a nightly conversation, a wordless affirmation of our life together. It fell past my shoulders, a curtain of memories, each silver strand a story. But that morning, something was terribly wrong. I sat up, my hand flying to the nape of my neck, and felt not the familiar cascade of hair, but a rough, jagged mess of stubble and uneven tufts. It was hacked. Butchered. My breath caught in my throat, a sharp, painful thing. On the pillow beside me, nestled in a horrifying pile of shimmering silver, lay my mother's old sewing scissors. Cold. Unfeeling. A violation. I stumbled out of bed and into the bathroom, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. The face in the mirror was mine, but it was a caricature of grief and shock. My eyes, wide with disbelief, stared out from beneath a crown of wreckage. Great, clumsy chunks were gone, leaving bald patches near my scalp in some places and spiky, awkward lengths in others. It was a cruel mockery of a haircut, an act of deliberate ugliness. I heard footsteps in the hall and Clara appeared in the doorway, a mug of coffee in her hand, a look of practiced innocence on her face. "Mom? You up early?" She looked at me, then at the scissors on my vanity that I must have carried from the bedroom in a daze. Her eyes widened, but not with shock. It was the performance of shock. "Oh my goodness, Mom, what did you do?" The question hung in the air, so preposterous, so insulting, that I couldn't form a response. I just stared at her reflection next to mine. My daughter, so beautiful and vibrant, on the cusp of her perfect wedding. And me, her mother, the crone in the looking glass. She took a step closer, her voice dropping to that gentle, patronizing tone she'd adopted since her father died, the one that suggested I was a fragile, slightly confused creature to be managed. "Your hair, it was just so uneven, Mom. It looked so straggly. I was just trying to help. I came in to check on you, and I saw how messy it was. I thought I'd just even it up for you while you slept, so you'd look your best for the wedding. I didn't mean to take so much off." The lies were so flimsy, so transparent, they were almost more insulting than the act itself. "Help? By mutilating me in my sleep. So I'd look my best." The unspoken truth screamed in the space between us. You were going to upstage me. You, with your silver menere, your quiet dignity. You were going to be beautiful, and this is my day to be beautiful. She didn't want me to look my best. She wanted me to be diminished, to be an ugly, pitiable backdrop to her bridal radiance. The silence in that bathroom was louder than any argument we had ever had. It was the silence of a final line being crossed, the silence of a love that had revealed itself to be a monstrous form of vanity. I saw it all with a sudden, horrifying clarity. The way she'd wrinkle her nose at my clothes, the gentle suggestions that I sell the house Robert and I built, the constant, subtle chipping away at my identity until all that was left was Clara's mother. I was an accessory for her life, and she had just altered me to better fit her aesthetic. I turned from the mirror and looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in years. I saw not my daughter, but a stranger whose smile didn't reach her cold, calculating eyes. I said nothing. I walked past her, out of the bathroom, and closed my bedroom door, the soft click of the latch a sound of finality. The war had begun, and I hadn't even known I was a combatant. But in the quiet of my desecrated room, I understood. She had used scissors. I would have to use something far sharper. The four walls of my bedroom became a sanctuary and a prison. For 2 days, I did not leave. Clara would knock, her voice laced with that cloying, false concern. "Mom? Can I bring you some tea?" "Please don't be like this, Leo," her fiancé, a man whose ambition was barely concealed beneath a veneer of charm, would call through the door. "Eleanor, we are worried about you. Clara is terribly upset that her plan had been met not with the tearful gratitude of a confused old woman, but with a wall of impenetrable silence." I did not answer. The silence was my only shield, my only weapon. Inside, I was adrift on a sea of memory, and every wave brought another piece of wreckage to the shore of my consciousness. The past wasn't just the past anymore, it was a map of this betrayal, and I had been blind to the landmarks for years. I sat in Robert's old armchair, my reflection a ghostly stranger in the darkened window pane. I saw Clara as a little girl, tugging on my long braid so hard it brought tears to my eyes, laughing when I yelped. I dismissed it as childish clumsiness. Now I saw it as an early test of dominance, a pulling on the reins. I saw her as a teenager, rolling her eyes as her friends complimented my hair. "Oh, Mom's stuck in the 60s, she'd say with a dismissive wave, a little barb disguised as a joke. I'd smiled, wanting her friends to like her, to see her as cool and modern. I hadn't realized she was teaching them, and herself, to see me as irrelevant. The memories sharpened, becoming more recent, more painful. Last year, when I'd suggested we use my mother's lace for her wedding veil, a piece of our family history, Clara had held it up with 2 fingers, as if it were a dusty rag. "It's yellow, Mom. And it smells like mothballs. We are going for a clean, modern aesthetic," she'd said but Leo had just stood behind her, nodding, his eyes already calculating the cost of the designer veil she'd bookmarked on her laptop. Every memory was a small cut, a tiny snip at the fabric of my selfhood. Her insistence that I sell this house, the house where she grew up, the house where Robert and I had measured our lives in pencil marks on a doorframe. "It's too much for you to manage, Mom," she'd said, her hand on my arm. "Leo and I found a lovely condo for you, much more practical. All the amenities, and a concierge practical for whom? For her, who would inherit the considerable profit from the sale of this land. For her, who wouldn't have to drive out to the suburbs to visit. For her, who wanted to scrub the old world clean and build her new one on its foundations." The wedding planning had been the final act. She had presented me with a budget, a spreadsheet of breathtaking expense. The venue, a renovated historic barn that cost more than my first car. The caterer, serving food I couldn't pronounce. And the dress. A cloud of silk and Italian lace that cost a small fortune. I had looked at the total, my breath catching. "Clara, this is a lot," she had smiled that brilliant, weaponized smile. "It's my one day, Mom. And Dad would have wanted me to have the best." The invocation of Robert's name was a masterstroke of manipulation. Of course he would have. But Robert would have wanted her to be happy, not to be a brand. He would have wanted a celebration of love, not a performance of wealth. And he would never, ever have countenanced this cruelty. I ran my hands over the shorn, spiky patches on my head. This was not about hair. The hair was just the symbol of what she was trying to excise, my history, my connection to her father, my independent identity. She saw me as a walking bank account, with a few inconvenient memories attached. By making me ugly, she was trying to make me invisible. By making me invisible, she was making me easier to manage, easier to discard. The grief was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest. It wasn't just for my hair, it was for the daughter I thought I had. The loving child I had created in my mind was a fiction. The reality was the cold-eyed stranger who had crept into my room while I slept. On the second day, the grief began to recede, replaced by a cold, clear stillness. The storm had passed, and in its wake, the landscape of my life was starkly, brutally clear. I looked at my pathetic reflection again, and for the first time, I didn't see a victim. I saw a survivor. This ragged, butchered hair wasn't an ending. It was a declaration of war. And I would not be fighting on her terms. She had used scissors, a tool of brute, intimate force. I would use structure, law, and finance. I would use the very tools of the world she and Leo worshipped. I would dismantle her perfect, curated wedding, not with anger, but with the quiet, irrefutable logic of a balance sheet. I picked up my phone, my fingers steady. I scrolled past Clara's name, past Leo's. I found the number I was looking for. Margaret. My friend of 40 years. A retired corporate lawyer, with a mind like a steel trap, and a spine to match. She answered on the second ring. Eleanor. Is everything all right? Her voice, crisp and sane, was a lifeline. And for the first time in 2 days, I spoke. The dam of my silence broke, and the story poured out, not with tears or hysterics, but with a low, steady tremor of fury. I told her everything. When I was finished, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. It was not a pause of disbelief, but of calculation. Then Margaret said, her voice dangerously calm, Eleanor, my dear friend. Get a pen. We are going to make a list. The drive to Margaret's house was the first time I had been outside in 3 days. I'd put on a silk scarf to cover my head, the soft fabric a poor substitute for the weight of my own hair, but it was a shield of sorts. The world felt too bright, too loud. As I drove, I saw reflections of myself in shop windows, a fleeting image of a woman in a headscarf, looking older, more foreign than I felt. I was a stranger to myself, and Clara had made me so. But with each mile that separated me from my house, from the scene of the violation, a strange calm settled over me. It was the calm of purpose. I was no longer a passive victim reacting to a shock. I was an agent on a mission. Margaret lived in a sleek, modern townhouse that was the exact opposite of my rambling, memory-filled home. Her space was all glass and steel and minimalist art. It was a reflection of her mind, organized, clear, with no room for clutter or sentimentality. She opened the door before I could ring the bell, her sharp eyes taking in the scarf, my pale face, the dark circles under my eyes. She didn't offer pity or platitudes. She simply wrapped me in a fierce, brief hug that smelled of expensive perfume and resolve. Come in, she said, her voice firm. I've made coffee. The strong kind. Her kitchen was as immaculate as the rest of the house. On her gleaming granite island, she had already laid out a yellow legal pad and 2 perfectly sharpened pencils. It was a war room. First things first, she said, pushing a mug of black coffee into my hands. Tell me again. Everything. Don't leave out a single detail, no matter how small you think it is. So I did. I recounted the incident with the scissors, Clara's pathetic excuse, the memories of 1,000 tiny cuts that had preceded this gaping wound. I talked about the wedding budget, the pressure to sell the house, the casual way Clara and Leo discussed my future, as if it were a logistical problem to be solved. Margaret listened without interrupting, her gaze unwavering. She made small, precise notes on the pad, her pencil moving with quiet efficiency. When I finally fell silent, the story told, she tapped the pencil on the pad. Good, she said, as if I had just completed a complex legal deposition. Now, the most important part. The money. You told me you were funding this production, most of it, I admitted, a flush of shame creeping up my neck. Robert's life insurance, some investments we had. I wanted her to be happy. She is happy, Eleanor, Margaret said, her voice devoid of sympathy. She is thrilled that you have mistaken her happiness for a six-figure party. Let's see the numbers. I'd brought the folder. My hands trembled slightly as I pulled out the spreadsheet Clara had so proudly prepared. I slid it across the island. Margaret put on her reading glasses and scanned the columns. A low whistle escaped her lips. Good Lord. A custom gown from a designer I've actually heard of. A photographer flown in from New York. A floral installation. She looked up at me over her glasses. Did you sign any contracts for these things? No, I said. Clara and Leo handled all of that. They just told me where to send the deposits. Most of them have been paid directly from my investment account. Margaret's smile was thin and dangerous. It was the smile that had made CEOs tremble. They didn't have you sign anything. They had you transfer funds. Which means the contracts are in their names, but the money is from you. And unless you signed a gift letter, or some other formal document stating your intention to gift this money irrevocably, it is still your money. You have simply been advancing it. The word hung in the air, advancing. It wasn't a gift. It was a loan. A loan I was about to call due. The venue, she continued, tapping the biggest line item. Paid in full. Yes, I whispered. They wanted to secure the date. From whose account? Mine. Then you didn't pay for their venue, Eleanor. You rented a very expensive barn for a day. A barn that you have full control over. A dizzying sense of power, cold and terrifying, washed over me. 4 years, I had felt my life was shrinking, my agency diminishing. Now, Margaret was showing me the girders of power I hadn't even realized I possessed. My grief, my hurt, they were real. But they had blinded me to the practical realities of my situation. And the house? Margaret asked, her eyes sharp. Has she pressured you to sign anything? Listing agreements? Power of attorney? No, she just talks about it. Says it's for the best. Of course she does, Margaret snorted. It's always for the best. That's the tyrant's favorite phrase. So, your assets are still entirely in your name. Your house, your investments, your savings. I nodded, my mind racing. The plan began to form in the space between us, unspoken but perfectly clear. It was simple. It was devastating. It was elegant. So, Margaret said, leaning back. Here is what you are going to do. You are not going to call Clara. You are not going to confront her. Emotion is her weapon, and you will not fight on her turf. You are going to fight on mine. We will use paper. We will use phone calls. We will use the unassailable logic of the transaction. She slid the legal pad over to me. On it, she had written a list. 1. Call the bank. Change account passwords. 2. Contact financial advisor. Freeze all transfers. 3. Call the venue. 4. Call the caterer. 5. Call the florist. 6. Call the photographer. She looked at me, her expression serious. You will make these calls. Your voice must be calm, clear, and firm. There is no room for anger or sadness. You are simply a woman revising a financial arrangement. That is all. Can you do that? I looked at the list, at the roadmap to my own liberation. The woman who had woken up in tears 2 days ago could not have done it. But the woman sitting in Margaret's kitchen, with a head full of ruined hair and a heart full of cold fire, could. I picked up the pencil. Yes, I said, my voice steady for the first time in days. I can, and I added a 7th item to the list, consult with estate planner. Establish the Robert Croft Foundation. The following Monday was a day of quiet, decisive action. I woke before dawn, the house still cloaked in the deep, pre-morning silence. Clara and Leo had spent the weekend at his parents' house, a pre-wedding tradition, a small mercy for which I was grateful. Their absence gave me the space I needed, a clear field on which to maneuver. I did not look in the mirror. Instead, I tied the silk scarf firmly over my head, a helmet for the battles ahead. I made myself the strong coffee Margaret had prescribed and sat down at the heavy oak desk in Robert's study, the one Clara always said was too big and dark for the room. Today, it felt like a fortress. At precisely 9 am, when the banks opened, I made the first call. The voice of the young woman at my local branch was cheerful and scripted. I listened patiently before I spoke. "My name is Eleanor Croft," I said, my voice lower and calmer than I'd expected. "I need to place an immediate security freeze on all of my accounts and change all online access passwords. I have reason to believe my account information may have been compromised." The word compromised was a beautiful, sterile thing. It carried no emotion, only fact. It was a world away from "my daughter stole from me." There was a flurry of typing, security questions, which I answered with rote precision, and then it was done. A wall of digital steel had just been erected. My next call was to my financial advisor, a man named Mr. Henderson, who had managed my portfolio for 20 years. He was a kind, steady man, who had guided me through the financial fog after Robert's death. "Eleanor. Good to hear from you. I was just about to approve that final transfer to the wedding planner. That's why I'm calling, David," I said, keeping my tone even. "You are to approve no further transfers to anyone, for any reason, without my direct verbal and written confirmation. Effective immediately. I am restructuring my financial plans." There was a pause. David was too professional to ask personal questions, but I could hear the unspoken curiosity. "Of course, Eleanor. I will cancel the pending transfer right away and flag the account. Is there anything else?" "Yes," I said, taking a deep breath. "I need to schedule a meeting with you and an estate lawyer. I'm establishing a foundation." In my husband's name. The line was quiet for a moment longer. Then David said, his voice imbued with a new level of respect, "I think that's a wonderful idea, Eleanor. I'll get right on it one by one." I worked my way down Margaret's list. Each call was a small act of reclamation. I spoke to the manager of the historic barn. "Hello, this is Eleanor Croft. I am calling regarding the booking for the Croft Henshaw wedding. I am the individual who paid for the rental. I need to inform you that the event scheduled for that date is cancelled. The manager sounded panicked. The payment is non-refundable." "I am aware," I said calmly. "I am not asking for a refund. I am simply informing you that the wedding will not be taking place there. I may use the venue for a different purpose on that day. I will be in touch." I imagined the manager's next call would be to a very confused Clara. Next, the caterer. A chic, impossibly French woman answered. I used the same calm, direct language. "I am calling to cancel the catering order for the Croft Henshaw wedding. I was the source of the deposit, and I am now formally withdrawing any further financial commitment. You will need to speak to Ms. Croft and Mr. Henshaw about settling the remainder of their contract with you." "But madam, the custom menu, the imported cheeses. We have already incurred costs." "I understand," I said, my voice a cool balm of indifference. "And I am sure Ms. Croft will be in touch to discuss them with you." The florist, the photographer, the string quartet. The conversations were all variations on the same theme. Shock, confusion, a frantic concern for their bottom line. To each, I gave the same dispassionate response, directing them back to the people who had actually signed the contracts, Clara and Leo. I was not the client, I was merely the bank. And the bank was now closed. My final call of the day was to the estate lawyer Margaret had recommended. We spoke for an hour about my vision for the Robert Croft Foundation. I told her about Robert's love for the arts, his quiet support of young, struggling painters and sculptors in our community. I told her I wanted to create grants, to give talented young people the start he never had. The lawyer was professional, but her voice warmed as I spoke. We were not talking about revenge. We were talking about legacy, about transforming pain into purpose. When I hung up the phone, the study was filled with the soft light of late afternoon. A profound sense of peace settled over me. I had not raised my voice. I had not shed a tear. I had simply realigned the world according to my own terms. I had taken the vast, chaotic, and painful energy of my daughter's betrayal and channeled it into a series of precise, irreversible actions. She had wanted to erase me. Instead, she had given me the clarity to write a new story for myself, a story where I was not the supporting character, but the author. The house was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet now. It was not the silence of dread, but the silence of anticipation. The first ripples of my actions were already spreading outwards. Soon, the tide would come rushing back to my door. And I would be ready. It was 2 days before the storm broke. 2 days of ringing phones that I let go to voicemail. Clara's voice, at first confused, "Mom," the caterer called, "There's some mix-up," then annoyed, "Mom, seriously, you need to call me back, this isn't funny," and finally, bordering on hysterical, "What did you do? They are saying everything is cancelled. Leo is furious. Call me." The messages were a barometer of their dawning horror, and I listened to them with the dispassionate interest of a meteorologist watching a storm form. I spent those 2 days in a cocoon of purpose. I met with the stylist Margaret had recommended, a chic woman with kind eyes who specialized in clients who had experienced hair loss from illness. She didn't flinch at the sight of my butchered hair. She simply nodded, touched my shoulder gently, and said, "All right. Let's find the new you." She worked for 2 hours, carefully evening out the jagged patches, shaping what was left into a sophisticated, incredibly short pixie cut. When she was finished, she turned me to face the mirror. The woman staring back was not the diminished crone my daughter had tried to create. This woman was elegant, bold, and modern. My silver hair, now shorn and styled, framed my face and highlighted my cheekbones. For the first time, I looked my age not as a sign of fading, but as a mark of strength. It was a warrior's haircut. I paid her, tipped her extravagantly, and walked out of the salon with my head held high, no scarf required. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I cooked a meal just for myself. Not a simple sandwich, but a proper meal. I made Robert's favorite lemon herb roasted chicken, filled the house with the scent of time and memory. I opened a good bottle of wine, set a single place at the dining room table with my best china, and ate in quiet contemplation. I was mourning the daughter I had lost, but I was also celebrating the woman I was finding. The doorbell rang at 7 p.m. on Wednesday evening. Right on schedule. I had just finished my dinner, and was sipping my wine. I took a moment to smooth my new hair, took a deep, steadying breath, and walked to the door. Through the leaded glass, I could see the silhouettes, Clara and Leo, tense and agitated. I opened the door. The sight of me must have been a shock. I was not the weeping, scarf-clad victim they had last seen. I was calm, put together, and my hair, far from being a source of shame, was a statement. Clara's jaw dropped slightly. Leo's eyes narrowed, a flicker of calculation in their depths. "Mom," Clara began, her voice tight with suppressed rage. "What is going on? We've been getting calls all day. The venue, the photographer, they are saying you cancelled everything." I stepped back and gestured them inside. "Hello, Clara. Leo. Please, come in." I led them not to the cozy living room, but to the formal dining room, where my single plate and wine glass sat in stark evidence of my solitary contentment. I remained standing at the head of the table. They stood awkwardly in the middle of the room, looking like petitioners in a throne room. "I didn't cancel your wedding, Clara," I said, my voice even and quiet. The silence in the room amplified my words. "I cancelled my financial contributions to it." Clara's face, already pale, lost all its color. "What? What does that mean? You promised." "Dad would have wanted." "Please don't," I said, and for the first time, a sliver of steel entered my voice, cutting her off. "Do not speak to me about what your father would have wanted. Your father would be appalled. He would be heartbroken by your cruelty." The word cruelty landed between us like a physical blow. Clara flinched. Leo, however, stepped forward, adopting his role as the reasonable negotiator. "Eleanor," he said, his tone smooth and placating. "I think there's been a huge misunderstanding. Clara was just trying to help. She loves you very much. This is all it's a reaction to stress, isn't it? The wedding is a stressful time, a misunderstanding." I turned my gaze to him, my eyes as cold as I could make them. Was it a misunderstanding when Clara came into my room while I was sleeping and cut my hair with a pair of sewing scissors? Was she helping when she tried to mutilate me so I wouldn't look too distracting at her wedding? Leo had the grace to look uncomfortable. He glanced at Clara, who refused to meet my eyes, staring instead at a spot on the Persian rug. "She told me you'd had an accident," he mumbled. "Of course she did," I said. "Because the truth is ugly. The truth is that my daughter is so consumed with her own image that she saw my presence, my very identity, as a threat to her perfect day. And so she tried to diminish me." I let the silence hang for a moment before continuing. "You seem to be under the impression that my resources, my home, and my future are all simply components of your wedding plans. That was a miscalculation on your part. I have spent my life providing for you, Clara. The financial arrangement for this wedding was just another extension of that. But my support was predicated on love and respect. When you demonstrated that you have neither for me, the arrangement was terminated." Clara finally looked up, her eyes swimming with tears. They were not tears of remorse, they were tears of thwarted rage. "So that's it. You're ruining my wedding because you're mad about a haircut. It's just hair. It will grow back." "Yes, it will," I said, touching my short, chic crop. "I am quite fond of the new style, actually. It feels unburdened. But you are mistaken. I am not ruining your wedding. I am reclaiming my life. The money you took for granted, the money you were using to build a monument to your own vanity, is being repurposed." This was the moment. The confrontation was not the climax. The climax was the revelation of my new purpose. Clara stared at me, her expression a mixture of disbelief and fury. "Repurposed? What are you talking about? That's my wedding fund. We planned everything based on that money. That money Dad left for me." Her voice rose, cracking with entitlement. It was a tantrum, the same kind she'd thrown as a toddler when denied a toy, just scaled up to an adult budget. Leo put a restraining hand on her arm, his eyes fixed on me, still trying to salvage the situation. "Eleanor, let's all just calm down. This is clearly an emotional time. There's no need to make any rash decisions. Whatever you're planning, we can talk about it. The wedding is in 6 weeks. We can fix this." "There is nothing to fix, Leo," I said, my voice remaining unnervingly calm. "And these are not rash decisions. They are the most deliberate decisions I have made in 20 years. I walked over to Robert's desk, the one that had become my command center, and picked up a slim, elegant folder. I held it in my hands, the smooth paper cool against my skin. It was the physical manifestation of my new resolve. "You see, Clara, you were right about one thing. Your father would have wanted his money to be used for something beautiful, something lasting. I looked directly at her, letting the weight of my next words settle. He just had a very different idea of what that meant. He didn't value floral installations or designer gowns. He valued talent. He valued potential. He valued the quiet, desperate struggle of young artists trying to create something meaningful in a world that mostly ignores them. I opened the folder. Inside were the preliminary documents, beautifully printed on heavy bond paper, for the Robert Croft Foundation for the Emerging Arts. I slid the top page onto the polished surface of the dining table. The logo was simple and elegant, Robert's initials intertwined with the silhouette of a painter's brush. This, I announced, is where the money is going. The entire fund you thought was for your wedding. It will now serve as the initial endowment for a foundation in your father's name. It will provide grants to young painters, sculptors, and artisans who are struggling to make a start. It will fund a gallery space for them to show their work. It will honor his memory, not by throwing an extravagant party, but by nurturing the creativity he so admired. The silence in the room was absolute. Clara stared at the paper, as if it were a venomous snake. The name, the logo, the sheer, irrefutable fact of it seemed to suck all the air from her lungs. This was not a punishment she could argue against. It was not petty revenge. It was a pivot to a higher moral ground, a transformation of her selfish act into an act of public good. She couldn't attack it without looking monstrous. Leo, ever the pragmatist, saw the strategic checkmate immediately. His face went blank, the mask of the charming fiancé falling away to reveal the cold, hard face of a man who has just seen a winning lottery ticket turn to ash in his hands. He understood finance. He understood that foundations were legal, binding, and irreversible. "You can't do that," Clara whispered, her voice hoarse. "It's not your money to give away, on the contrary," I said, tapping the folder. "My lawyer and my financial advisor assure me it is entirely my money. What you received were advances, not gifts. And I have now chosen to invest those funds elsewhere. In a legacy. Something that will last longer than wilted flowers and stale wedding cake. Something that will actually do some good in the world." I let that hang in the air, the implicit comparison between her wedding and my foundation stark and damning. Her party was a fleeting moment of vanity. My foundation was an enduring act of philanthropy. She had tried to make me small and ugly. In response, I had created something large and beautiful that completely eclipsed her. Her face crumpled. The rage gave way to a raw, wounded look, the look of a child who has finally understood the consequences of her actions. She had not just lost the funding for her dream wedding, she had lost her father's legacy. I had taken it from her and given it to strangers. She looked from the folder to me, and in her eyes, I saw the devastating realization. I was no longer just Mom, I was a power she had not recognized, a force she had fatally underestimated. "You will, of course, have to make some adjustments to your wedding plans," I said, my voice softening slightly, not out of pity, but out of a sense of finality. "I'm sure you and Leo can arrange a celebration that is more in line with your own resources. A smaller, more intimate affair. Perhaps that will be for the best." The phrase hung in the air, a deliberate echo of her own patronizing words to me. "It's for your own good. It's for the best." For the first time, she was on the receiving end of that cold, dismissive logic. The quiet confrontation was over. There was nothing more to say. I had not yelled, I had not cried. I had simply presented the facts. I had rewritten the future, and they had no choice but to read the new script. Clara stood frozen for a long moment, her face a mask of disbelief. Then, with a strangled sob, she turned and fled, not just from the room, but from the house, slamming the front door behind her with a force that rattled the windows. The sound echoed in the sudden, vast silence. Leo remained, a statue of thwarted ambition. He looked at the folder on the table, then at me. His expression was no longer charming or placating, it was stripped bare, revealing a raw and ugly contempt. "You know," he said, his voice low and venomous, "she was right about you. You are a cold, selfish woman." All of this, just to punish her. It was his last, desperate gambit, an attempt to reframe my actions as petty and cruel, to wrestle back some semblance of moral high ground. It did not work. I met his gaze without flinching. Is it selfish to protect oneself? Is it selfish to refuse to finance your own erasure? You and Clara saw me as a resource to be depleted. A problem to be managed. You never saw me as a person. This isn't a punishment, Leo. It's a correction. He had no answer to that. The truth of it was unassailable. He gave a short, mirthless laugh, a sound like grinding gravel. "Fine. Have your foundation. Have your legacy. You've just lost your daughter." He turned and walked out, closing the door quietly behind him, a final, failed attempt at dignity. The silence that descended then was different from all the silences that had come before. It was not the tense silence of dread, or the heavy silence of grief. It was a clean, pure silence. The silence of a space that has been cleared of all its clutter. The silence of a new beginning. I walked through the quiet house, my house, and felt its presence in a way I hadn't in years. I ran my hand along the smooth, cool wood of the dining table. I looked at the single, solitary place setting. It did not look lonely. It looked serene. It looked like freedom. The next morning, I woke with the sun. I went into the bathroom and looked at my reflection. At my new, short hair. The woman in the mirror looked strong. She looked interesting. She looked like herself. I spent the day doing something I had put off for a decade. I went through Robert's closets. It had been a sanctuary of grief, a place I couldn't bear to disturb. But now, it felt right. I packed his beautiful suits and coats, his collection of silk ties, his worn tweed jackets, and arranged to have them donated to a charity that helps men get back into the workforce. I kept one thing, his favorite cashmere scarf, which still smelled faintly of him. Then I went into Clara's old room. It had been preserved as a shrine to her childhood, a place she hadn't slept in for years, but insisted I keep just as it was. I looked at the posters on the wall, the collection of dolls, the faded ribbons from horseback riding. It was the room of a girl I no longer knew, a girl who perhaps never really existed outside of my own hopeful imagination. Methodically, I began to pack it all into boxes. I was not angry. I was simply archiving. I was turning a shrine back into a room. This space would become the office for the Robert Croft Foundation. It would be a place of purpose, of work, of new beginnings. The physical act of sorting and packing was a form of therapy. With each box I taped shut, I was sealing away a part of the past that no longer served me. I was not erasing my daughter, but I was containing her memory, putting it in its proper place. It would no longer be allowed to dominate the entire house. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the empty room, I received a text message. It was from a number I didn't recognize, a friend of Clara's, probably. It was a picture of a wedding invitation. A new one. Printed hastily on cheap cardstock. The date was the same, but the venue had been changed to the function room of a suburban hotel. Below it, a single line of text, "I hope you're happy." I looked at the picture for a long moment. A part of me, the old mother part, felt a pang of something akin to sadness. But it was fleeting. I thought of the young artists who would soon have a chance to pursue their dreams. I thought of the way my husband's memory would now be honored with creation, not consumption. I thought of the woman in the mirror that morning, the one with the warrior's haircut. And I typed back a simple, honest reply. I am. Then I deleted the message, blocked the number, and went to make myself a cup of tea. The quiet work of building my new life had just begun. In the weeks that followed, the world rearranged itself around my new reality. The initial fallout was a flurry of phone calls from bewildered or indignant relatives, mostly Leos, who had heard a wildly distorted version of events in which I was a vindictive matriarch who had inexplicably ruined a young couple's happiness. I listened politely, said very little, and did not defend myself. There was no need. The truth had its own quiet power, and I was content to let it do its work. Clara did not call. She did not write. She got married on the planned date, in the hotel function room, wearing a dress that was not the couture gown she had coveted. I saw a few pictures that a well-meaning cousin posted online. She looked beautiful, but her smile was brittle, her eyes lacking the joyful radiance she had so desperately wanted to project. Leo stood beside her, looking like a man who had settled for a lesser prize. They looked like actors in a play they no longer wished to be in. I felt a detached sort of pity for them, the kind one feels for strangers who have made poor choices. But their life was no longer my concern. My life was here, in this house, which was slowly being transformed. The room that had been Clara's shrine was now a functional, elegant office. A large drafting table sat under the window where her vanity used to be. The walls were lined with bookshelves, waiting to be filled. I had my first official board meeting for the Robert Croft Foundation around my dining room table. Margaret was there, of course, along with David Henderson, my financial advisor, and a respected curator from the local art museum. We spent 3 hours mapping out the grant application process, debating the charter, and planning our first fundraising event. I was not a silent observer. I was the chairwoman. I had opinions. I had a vision. I spoke with a clarity and confidence that surprised even myself. These people were not treating me like a fragile widow or a confused old woman. They were treating me like a peer, a leader. They were listening to me. After the meeting, Margaret stayed behind to help me clear the coffee cups. "You were formidable in there, Eleanor," she said, her eyes twinkling. "I haven't seen a board run that efficiently in years." I smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile. "I'm discovering I have a knack for it." "You always had it," she said, placing a hand on my arm. "You just spent 40 years managing a different kind of corporation." She was right. A family was a corporation of sorts, with budgets and logistics and human resources. I had simply transferred my skills to a new enterprise, one that offered a far greater return on investment. A month after the wedding, that wasn't tea, I did something just for me. Robert and I had always dreamed of visiting the wild, windswept coast of Scotland, but life, and then his illness, had always gotten in the way. I booked a ticket, packed a single suitcase, and went by myself. For 2 weeks, I explored ancient castles, walked along misty lochs, and stood on cliffs overlooking the churning North Sea. The wind was relentless, the landscape stark and beautiful. It felt like the edge of the world. I felt no fear, only a profound sense of peace and belonging. I was a solitary figure in a vast landscape, but I was not lonely. I was self-contained. I was whole. I sent postcards to Margaret and my other friends. I did not send one to Clara. I bought myself a beautifully crafted silver pin from a local artisan, shaped like a Celtic knot, and wore it on my coat. It was a souvenir from my first voyage into my new life. When I returned home, the house felt welcoming. My first batch of applications for the foundation grants had arrived. I spent my evenings reading the stories of young, hopeful artists, their passion and talent evident in their words and their work. It was a world away from the sterile, transactional world of wedding planning. This was about dreams, about creation, about hope. This was a legacy Robert would have been proud of. One evening, there was a letter in the mailbox with no return address, the handwriting instantly familiar. My heart gave a small, nervous flutter. It was from Clara. I let it sit on the hall table for a full day before I opened it. I needed to be sure I was reading it from a place of strength, not lingering hurt. The letter was short. It was not the apology I might have once hoped for, nor was it the venomous screed I might have expected. It was something in between. A stiff, formal acknowledgement of my generosity in creating the foundation, followed by a confused, wounded paragraph about how she felt abandoned and punished. It ended with a simple, plaintive question, "Don't you miss me?" I read the letter twice, then folded it and placed it in a box with her other childhood artifacts. I did miss someone. I missed the daughter I thought I had, the sweet girl I had raised in my memory. But the woman who wrote this letter. The woman who could still not comprehend the depth of her own cruelty. No. I did not miss her. I was too busy building a life she could never be a part of. A year can be a lifetime. In the year that followed the severing, I lived more fully and more authentically than I had in the preceding 30. The Robert Croft Foundation became my passion and my purpose. Our first exhibition, showcasing the work of our 5 inaugural grant recipients, was a resounding success. The small gallery space we rented was packed on opening night with artists, patrons, and members of the community. I stood near the back, watching, my heart swelling with a quiet, fierce pride. The 5 young artists were beaming, their work luminous under the gallery lights. They spoke about their art with such passion, their gratitude for the foundation's support palpable. This was real. This was meaningful. It was the furthest thing from a performance of vanity. I wore a simple, elegant black dress and the silver pin from Scotland. My hair, still short, now had a distinguished shimmer, no longer a symbol of violation, but a statement of style and self-possession. Many people came up to me, congratulating me on the foundation's success. They saw me as Eleanor Croft, philanthropist, arts patron, chairwoman. No one saw me as just Clara's mother. The name was rarely mentioned in my presence anymore, it belonged to a different world, a world I no longer inhabited. Margaret was there, of course, a flute of champagne in her hand, her eyes shining. "Look what you did, Eleanor," she said, gesturing around the crowded room. "You turned something ugly into all of this." "We did," I corrected her gently. But I knew what she meant. The catalyst had been ugly, but the result was beautiful. At the end of the evening, one of the young painters, a quiet girl named Sarah, whose landscapes were breathtakingly poignant, came over to me. "Mrs. Croft," she said, her hands nervously twisting the stem of her glass. I don't know how to thank you. This grant, it didn't just give me money. It gave me time. It gave me the confidence to believe my work was worth something. You changed my life." The sincerity in her eyes was a gift. "Your work was always worth something, Sarah," I told her. "You just needed the world to catch up. Your father would have loved your use of light," I added, thinking of Robert and his amateur photography. Her eyes filled with tears, and she gave me a spontaneous, heartfelt hug. In that moment, I felt a connection, a sense of maternal pride that was purer and more profound than anything I had felt for Clara in years. This was the family I was building now, a family of shared purpose, mutual respect, and creativity. Later that week, as I was working in my office, I found the letter Clara had sent me months ago. I read it again. "Don't you miss me?" The question had once seemed poignant. Now, it seemed to miss the point entirely. She was asking if I missed the role I used to play in her life. The accommodating mother, the silent benefactor, the reliable backdrop. She wasn't asking if I missed her, the complex, flawed person she was, because she had never truly shown that person to me. She had only shown me the reflection she wanted me to see. I realized I didn't need to reply. My answer was all around me. It was in the vibrant paintings on the gallery walls, in the thank you notes from the artists, in the quiet hum of purpose that now filled my house. It was in the confident, peaceful woman who looked back at me from the mirror each morning. My life was my reply. At the start of this journey, I asked if you have ever been made to feel like a ghost in your own home. I was that ghost. I was the whisper in the walls, the warmth from a fire no one tended. My daughter's act of cruelty, her attempt to snip away the last vestiges of my identity, was meant to be the final act of my erasure. But she made a critical error. She thought that by cutting the ties that bound me to her, she was setting me adrift. She didn't realize she was setting me free. She didn't understand that silence does not always mean surrender. Sometimes, it is the quiet before the tide turns. Sometimes, the deepest betrayals are not endings, but violent, necessary beginnings. They clear the path, burn away the fog, and force you to see the landscape of your life with devastating clarity. And in that clarity, you find a new path, one that is entirely your own. One that leads not back to what was lost, but forward, to a place of quiet strength, enduring purpose, and a peace you never knew was possible.